Welcome back. This show is all about the idea that we could have been here before in a past life. So far, we've seen singer-songwriter Jane McDonald take part in a regression session where she appeared to describe the life of a dancer, Zara, in an Arabian palace.
I've been drowned.
Who's drowning you?
The girl who's bathing me, she's drowning me.
So, the question is, what do you believe? Do you think that Jane was reliving moments from a past life? Or do you think that it all came from her imagination? The idea that we could have lived before certainly stirs up some interesting debate.
When I hear people talking about past life regression, the word that springs to mind is imagination. When people undergo this kind of procedure, then what they're actually doing without realising it is they're using their own imaginations to try and come up with this rich and colourful narrative based on their imagination, bits of information they've picked up from various places.
You tend to find that in regression, people choose particular centuries and there's some parts of the world which are much more popular than others. For example, Egypt is quite a popular place to go back to, or anywhere in the Middle East. Tibet, with its kind of mystic associations, is a very popular place. You don't have many people, say, for example, regressing to a life in sub-Saharan Africa or Uzbekistan or somewhere like that.
The people who come up with the past life scenarios under hypnosis may believe it themselves, they may even be skeptical. There are some people who claim that it doesn't matter whether it's real or not. It's an interesting experience which may have therapeutic purposes.
In a moment, I'll be finding out exactly what Jane makes of it all. But first, it's time to find out the results of our detective work. Will the records back up Jane's story? Time for our expert historian, Jules Hudson, to reveal if any of the details in Jane's regression ring true.
In Jane's regression, she tells us about the life of Zara, a dancer who married a king. Trying to track down the real Zara has been quite a tale in itself, but there were one or two clues in Jane's regression that I thought were pretty good. The first one was Zara the name, and that gets us off to a cracking start. It comes from the Arabic word Zahra, meaning blooming flower, quite appropriate for our dancing beauty. But what else did she say?
What was the name of the village where your family lived?
Bakara. It's near the Sahara. It's very hot.
Jane's mention of the Sahara is vital because it gives us a chance to place her somewhere within the vastness of the Arabic world. From the 1500s onwards, it was a world dominated by the great Ottoman Empire, and that stretched from Bulgaria and the Balkans up here in the north, all the way through what is modern Turkey, the Middle East, and across the north coast of Africa, right next to the Sahara Desert. Now, I couldn't find a Bakara in North Africa, but there are some extraordinary stories of towns and cities being lost to the swirling sands of the desert. Maybe Jane's Bakara is still lost to time underneath the Sahara itself. But not finding the town didn't mean the end of the story.
And where were you dancing, or who were you dancing for?
For the Tsar.
It turns out that the first people to use the title of Tsar for their king were the Bulgarians. And in the late 14th century, the Bulgarians were actually part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans didn't officially keep the title, but could it have continued to be used as a slang term? Maybe.
He wants me to be another wife. Shara wants this to happen too. She likes me too.
In Jane's regression, the Tsar has a first wife, Shara, before he marries Zara. Marrying several times was a common practice in the Arab world, and a Muslim man could have up to 4 wives. So again, Jane's details check out with the description of Zara's daily life. The women would have been in a harem, not the Hollywood version, but an area of the palace where the women lived separately. Few men were allowed in, but there were some exceptions.
What position does the person you're keen on have in the palace?
He's a musician. I like to see him. I get excited when I see him.
And have you found any time to be alone together?
Just when I'm dancing.
So Zara was in love with a musician. Now, this is where it begins to get really exciting because musicians would have been some of the few men actually allowed into a harem. Now, they probably would have been blindfolded and almost certainly not allowed to actually speak, but they could have played for the women. And that's not all. There was one more detail which really grabbed my attention, and it came from Jane's description of Zara's clothing.
I'm wearing silks, coral silks.
When we think of Arabic dancers, most of us, of course, will think of belly dancers. But we'd be wrong. Belly dancing is actually a 19th century invention, and back in Zara's time, it's more likely that Muslim women would not have been allowed to expose their midriff. Astonishingly, Jane didn't describe this commonly held view. Rather than a sequined belly dancer, an Arabic dancer would have worn a long silken dress with a sash tied around the hips. Silks, not sequins, was the style of choice. Jane's description of opulent dress and palace life is tantalisingly accurate. But even surrounded by riches, Zara's days were numbered.
I'm being bathed.
And how do you feel? What's happening?
I'm being drowned.
Old Queen Zara is killed off in her own palace. Pure fantasy, you might think, but across the Ottoman Empire we know that queens were often killed off. Rivalries between various wives often meant that the harem was a hotbed of plot and intrigue. And of course the servants, who by far had the best access to these people, were perfectly placed to carry out the dirty work. So, perhaps Queen Zara had outlived her usefulness. But either way, she'd certainly outlived her welcome.
Who's drowning you? Can you see?
The girl who's bathing me, she's drowning me.
So right up to her death, Zara's story is full of details that do seem to fit what we know about life at the time. It's incredible that in a story so seemingly full of fantasy and colour, so many parallels to history have been found. But I'm amazed that rather than talking about stereotypes, Jane actually mentions details that have turned out to be surprisingly accurate.